So we continue with the next speaker. In his everyday work, he's bridging various disciplines of design and he's teaching product design at Parsons, the New School of Design. So please welcome Andrea Ruggiero.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me and having me speak. I am, as David mentioned, I am a designer, a professional designer, a working designer. I work in the commercial context, and I wish to emphasize that because we'll talk about design and consumption. I've been very much thinking about consumption. I thought David actually had a very interesting piece that just came out about consumption. So when I was asked to talk about design beyond design, I thought that actually consumption is something we need to consider. We are, of course, all consumers, and that's just something we have to come to terms with. We consume resources and products. So resources, everything from air to water, of course, and we turn also those resources into products. So that is the reality of what we're faced with. Very interesting, at some point we were also resources for other things. But what I thought was very interesting about this is who's a consumer. And the consumer in this case is this little spear, or I should say that's the thing that actually turns the human into the consumer, right? Probably a better image would have been the Indians hunting whales, which you've seen many times, relatively small boats, and they go out and they try to spear a whale, which is quite remarkable. But so the design and the development of a tool suddenly transformed humans from, being merely food for other creatures to actually attacking and being able to skin and consume creatures. So that's just an interesting thing that I was thinking about. So the problem is not so much consumption, I realize, but it's actually disproportionate consumption. And I think we've all sort of touched on this, or at least read about this. Just a quick fact is that the world's richest 20% accounts for 76% of total private consumption, okay? Which is pretty astounding, especially when you consider that the world's poorest 20% only accounts for 1.5% of total private consumption, right? These are the most recent World Bank development indicators. So 76 versus 1.5, just something to keep in mind. So commerce and design have, defined consumption in the industrial age, basically. And, designers often get a bad rap, right? So design is a dirty word. Is it really? As a designer, I have to say that we were talking about this actually yesterday. I think that there's been a lot of criticism, especially on blogs and various other forums, laying blame on all the world's evil to designers. But we were talking about this yesterday, and actually it's quite interesting. I would love to get a figure to find out what percentage of products that are actually produced and manufactured are actually created by designers, professional designers. Yeah. There's marketers, there are engineers, there are people in China manufacturing this stuff who have no training whatsoever, right? So that's something to keep in mind before, getting armchair criticism. But design is like a language, It's very interesting because I think there's some parallels here. If you look at an old film, like, an American Hollywood film from like the 50s, 60s, people were talking in a very different way, right? I was actually reading a book which was interestingly translated from Hungarian into Italian. And it was very strange, this book, because the Italian just didn't seem right to me. And I realized it was actually translated in the 30s, or even slightly earlier, during Mussolini's period. And so that type of language has changed since then. The way we use language, the vernacular has changed. And the same thing with design. It's constantly evolving. It's constantly mutating, right? So designers need to evolve if we want to stay in the game and if we want to score the points. We have to understand where those boundaries are, and those boundaries are constantly shifting. I've been really thinking about this consumption thing for a while now. And I think one of the things that triggered this was I realized that there are very different ways of consuming in Europe and in the US. and various other places. And I've been thinking about this a little bit. I came up with sort of a theory. I don't know if it's, again, this is not scientific. This is just purely observational. I believe designers need to be good observers. So I've just been looking a lot. And it's really much more for discussion. So I've come up with 3 distinctly identifiable consumer typologies. The pre-consumer, the overconsumer, and the post-consumer. These typologies often coexist at the same time in the same countries. So like right now in the US, there are pre-consumers, overconsumers, and post-consumers. The defining factor, I find, is wealth distribution and education. But the nature of consumption is evolutionary. So if we were to run back to this for a second, this is evolutionary. So you don't jump from here to here. You have to actually go through this process. It's like you don't go from being 3 years old to being a 20-year-old. You have to go through the teenage years, right? So we can look at it this way too. The pre-consumer you can consider as underdeveloped. I hesitated using images, but because images can convey a lot, but I thought it would be good to throw something in. This could possibly be a pre-consumer scenario. Notice that there's nothing in injection molded plastic, there's no branding, so on and so forth. The overconsumer is supersized, and we all know the overconsumer. We've seen the overconsumer in action. Maybe we have been the overconsumer. But this is one of the categories that is kind of exciting me as a post-consumer, because the post-consumer is enlightened. We can also look at it this way. The pre-consumer is necessity-oriented. The overconsumer is aspirational or fantasy-oriented. And the post-consumer is reality-based. So I also just wanted to quickly sort of look at these categories because they have different tendencies or traits. So if we're to look at very basically the market conditions, on a comparative basis here, we have underdeveloped to developing markets. We have the overconsumer with a developed market to a mature market. And the post-consumer, which is, I would probably venture to guess, most of the people in this room are probably somewhere in this category, is a saturated market resulting in selective consumption. So that would translate on a value basis that for the pre-consumer, what they really value is cheap, affordable, and readily available. For the overconsumer, it would be newest, latest, and trend-based. A post-consumer, on the other hand, is looking for something timeless, sustainable, and something that offers a long-term value. This then obviously influences the purchase decisions. For the pre-consumer, it's value-based. It's dictated by need instead of want. Okay? Want is a luxury. Okay? For the overconsumer, it's very consumption-driven, you know, and often confusing, blurring that line between want and need. And lastly, some of you might not see this, for the post-consumer, the focus is really on quality and performance, informed decision-making, right? So just as a banal example, here, a pre-consumer is probably walking somewhere. If they're lucky, maybe they can get a lift on someone's bike, right? So the idea of having a car is just, you know, it's like a fantasy. The overconsumer, you know, maybe has 2 cars in a garage, and they're a single person, so why do they need 2 cars? The post-consumer maybe can go out and buy any car that they want, but maybe they decide they don't actually need a car. Maybe they're much more interested in using a zip car, or you know, taking public transportation, or if they buy a car based on quality and ecological attributes. So obviously then the brand relevance is also an interesting thing to look at. For the pre-consumer, it's completely irrelevant. They don't care what they're wearing. They just want to wear something, right? So the advertising is completely unimportant. The overconsumer, brand is God. It symbolizes status and security, and advertising achieves maximum penetration. For the post-consumer, the brands are really less important. Selectively just ignoring advertising, filtering it out, right? A great example of this, I remember I was in Jamaica many years ago visiting my father, and we were driving around in Kingston, and I saw this billboard on the side of the road, this yellow tablet with this black guy on there just smiling, and it said, "Eat cheese," in these big letters. And I thought, this is so bizarre, eat cheese. So, you know, that's the kind of advertising targeted maybe for a pre-consumers, eat cheese. You know, it was so bizarre that I just remember that distinctly. For the over-consumer, it would be eat X brand cheese because it's, and maybe for the post-consumer, it would be, you know, try this type of cheese because it's made from the finest, you know, sheep growing in the mountains of Spain, blah, blah, etc. So that's just one way of looking at it. Also, then brings up the eco-awareness aspect. For the pre-consumer, reuse out of necessity, right? So like a glass jar, for example, is actually a valuable object because you can contain things in a very simple glass jar, right? For the overconsumer, new equals good, obsolescence, disposability, it's not my problem. Okay, there might be an acknowledgement of the problem, but it's not my problem. So the glass jar is not relevant. You can just throw it out, right? Because I have my LSC containers, I have all my things in the kitchen. My kitchen looks like all the magazines. Great. The post-consumer actually will say, well, you know, maybe I'm actually going to take my glass jar to the store and fill it because I understand that there's actually value in that. So there's some eco-angst here, recycling, resource conservation, and the post-consumer understands that they can make a difference. So lastly, that would bring us really to the primary focus. For the pre-consumer, it's about family survival, right, and economic uncertainty. For the over-consumer, it's really a cumulative, individualistic, self-absorbed material. And for the post-consumer, lastly, it's experiential. It's about the experience, sustainability, we instead of me, act locally and think globally, right? Now, designers have been traditionally focused on the over-consumer because it's obvious. We live in a very commercial world, and corporations are set up to create products. But the party is over as we know it, or maybe the party has just moved to the brick block, which is also an interesting way of looking at it. Just some very interesting examples. I was just thinking a few months ago, I was at Barney's, just not too far from here, with a girlfriend, and I was just sitting around as a person was shopping, and I was just observing, and there was the only women that were in the shop in the women's section were from Brazil, from India, and from China. So there was a brick block. Of course, we know that the overconsumer is overspent and overconsumed, right? It's done. That party's over, okay? And the hangover is not really going away so fast, is it? Our heads are still hurting. I mean, we saw this after the financial crisis. It's still with us. But the environmental and population crisis also requires a new focus for designers. And in my estimation, the overconsumer, as we just said, is out of focus. It's done. It's over with. So you have the pre-consumer, which is what a lot of design has been focusing on, and also Cooper-Hewitt, there's been a lot of talk about this, which is very interesting. But I think that in a commercial context, again, there's not much you're going to be doing here, right? So where a lot of emphasis is starting to shift for design is to the post-consumer. Regardless, those two areas, I think, are areas of opportunity for design. But what we really need to do is focus on creating long-term value versus immediate returns. One way of looking at this, I was talking with a very dear friend of mine who makes wine. We were discussing, and it's very remarkable if you've ever cooked anything, if you've ever taken the recipe of maybe your grandmother, your mother, and tried to replicate it, right? Maybe it's perfect, but it's just not the same. Why is that? What's missing? What's that thing that's missing? Love, right? And so this friend of mine who makes wine, he was saying, you know, we decided that we're just not going to release the 2010 vintage. You know, it doesn't make economic, it's complete insanity for me as a business person, he said, but I'm just not comfortable with that. I don't think it's the product that I want to put my name on yet. We'll release it next year maybe. So it's just, you know, this type of thinking is important to have. So that more is not better really, but that better is better. And that's really the approach that designers need to be taking. So we need to design less, but design better. And we need to design with love, of course. So thank you very much.
I was just curious, your opinion, if you think there would be an emergence of a new type of consumer after, like, I guess the impression is we're migrating towards a post-consumer culture. Of course, it's going to take maybe decades to fully realize it. Is there, in your opinion, another type of future consumer
Beyond that, you mean?
What's that?
Beyond the post-consumer?
Yeah, beyond those three.
I haven't really considered that, but one thing that I didn't really mention was that to move from pre-consumer to over-consumer, and notice I don't even talk about consumer, it's just from one extreme to the other because it happens fairly fast. I mean, well, it's really dependent on wealth creation. But moving from the over-consumer to the post-consumer requires knowledge, actually. So it's not just a question of wealth. So, you know, the post-consumer could probably buy whatever they wanted, but it's a question of actually having the knowledge and understanding your purchase decisions. Whereas with the pre-consumer going to an over-consumer, it's just a question of being able to afford something. Where do we go beyond that is a very good question. I haven't thought about it, but I think that we are slowly shifting for many reasons, the ecological crisis, financial crisis. It's just an unsustainable way of living, basically, and we all acknowledge that, I think, here.
Okay, thank you very much. We have one more question over here.
Hi, Andrea.
Hi.
Question for you is, will it happen that maybe there may be a pre-consumer, over-consumer, and a post-consumer existing at the same time with an individual? So I'm kind of really flipping it, really thinking about, at the moment, we're looking at it from a consumer point of view. Let's look at it from a market point of view, where there may be markets that are very nascent and market that has been saturated or developed. So for instance, look at now here, we may be post-consumer in terms of cheeses, where we're being more selective, but with regards to maybe mobile technology, that same individual are still maybe a pre or an over-consumer in terms of how because the thing is the market itself is maybe hasn't got yet to that level of saturation itself. So you could look at it more in terms of market as opposed to just a state of an individual themselves. So kind of really flipping.
Well, I would say the market influences who we are as well. You know, we're all part of some market in some way. You know, of course, I drew these lines very clearly, you know, between the three categories, but they're actually very shifty and blurry. Is probably much more an accurate way of looking at it. I just want to share, I brought this book called No Waste, which I'm happy to share and pass around as long as I get it back, which is from Pentagram. And there was a great example in particular. This is all about repurposed things from pre-consumer sort of. A great example of this would be like in Cuba. And a lot of these photographs are actually from Cuba. This is a taxi. I don't know if you can see this. It's a taxi sign made out of an oil can, or actually no, antifreeze can. And somebody put a light bulb inside of it, right? So that's, you know, a great example of, you know, not having to go out and buy something.
Thank you very much. So we move into the next one. Thank you very much.